Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Somaieh, the AI ethics stream owner at ACE. ACE is a global community of machine learning enthusiasts and practitioners founded in Toronto, Canada. At ACE, we believe in collaborative learning to make AI research more consumable and more accessible, while also helping developers implement their work and put it into production. At ACE, we are working on creating a repository of YouTube videos that showcase authors talking about their research and highlighting the work that we think is important. We also host social events where you get a chance to network with community members. We host workshops that teach you to translate machine learning to code and real world applications. So, today we are joined by Merve Hickok. She's going to talk about bias in AI system. Merve is an independent consultant, lecturer, speaker on ethical of AIEthicist.org and Lighthouse Career Consulting. She collaborates with several national and international organizations such as Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, Oceanica RMDS Lab for Humanity Center, Women in AI Ethics Collective, AI Policy Exchange, and High Sierra Industries. She has more than 15 years of global level senior experience in Fortune 100 with particular focus on HR technology, recruitment, and diversity. I am so excited about this session and I'm looking forward to the talk, and I hope you are too. First, Merve is going to make her presentation uninterrupted, and then we have a discussion for the remainder of the session. Feel free to add any questions you have in the live chat, and I'll make sure to relate them to Merve as we discuss. So with no further ado, I'll pass the microphone to Merve.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. And let me start then. So as you know, machine learning algorithms are statistical models looking to predict create future predictions about, by relying on historical data and the patterns within that data. However, when we are using data, any data that is created by humans or is about humans, we need to be extra diligent about it. Instead of providing an objective view or ground truth, the data almost always will include a kind of bias. AI itself, the AI systems, algorithms don't have any moral agency, direction, or moral reasoning. So it's also dependent on the developers on what is ethical or what is provided in the training data, what constraints are in place, and what outcomes should look like. So we're looking at the developers and implementers to be ethical and not the AI. But the developers also have their own biases, conscious or unconscious. So the mix of this bias in data, potential bias in data, and potential bias with the developers, whether it's conscious or unconscious, tends to have the snowball effect in the AI algorithms or the machine learning algorithms. And we can have unintended bias creeping into the systems. So it's crucial that we understand the context, first and foremost, of whichever problem we are trying to solve, the history behind it, and how the data might be impacted through the interactions, human interactions, or the way that it was collected. Before we hammer, I always say, before we hammer a technology solution to a problem, we need to understand why that is a problem in the first place, who has tried which solutions in the past, how did they fare, why they were successful, where they failed, and whether AI is even a solution we should be talking about. So if the answer is yes, the rest of my presentation obviously makes sense, but that really is the first question, should we be even using AI? What I'm sharing here on the screen is just to underline that understanding the context, knowing the context of your data for the solutions that you're creating. The example, the visual that you see on the left is an image showing the from Cleveland, downtown Cleveland, inner city Cleveland, where the red piece is the red line district in downtown Cleveland. For those of you who might not be familiar with the redlining practices, back in the 1930s in the US, the housing and mortgage practices were preventing disadvantaged communities, most of the time Black communities, from getting access to mortgages or buying houses. Some of those practices continued continued during and after World War II. And these red line districts became predominantly Black communities. With the civil rights movement in mid-60s and through the 70s, the new regulations intervened and tried to correct and fight the systematic discrimination. However, the data stays. The neighborhoods are more or less still reflective. The data stays, and the new studies that are done on the outcome of the algorithmic credit scoring systems and mortgage results show that there is a similar trend that is going on. So the image on the right is from 2012 to 2016. So a very recent data or visualization where you're seeing the bit in the blue without not many dots, red dots. Where the home purchase or house purchase originations are almost non-existent. So it's the same red line district, the ones that were the area that was disadvantaged and blocked from buying houses or blocked from getting mortgages to buy houses, are having similar issues even to this day. So just understanding how your data was collected is crucial, and knowing the context, historical, social, racial context behind it is crucial. Similar patterns of that red line districts with services, with commercial services. This is a great example review or analysis by Bloomberg. I strongly suggest that you read both of these articles at some point. But what they've done here is kind of overlap the US Census data, Census Bureau data, with Amazon same-day delivery, Prime delivery services. And what it shows is and they looked at the major cities. So in the 6 major cities, the service area excludes predominantly Black zip codes to varying degrees. And that really shows how the service is provided versus how the communities are split in this cities. And the cities these cities are still struggling to overcome generations of racial segregation and economic inequality. What the study showed was Black citizens are about half as likely to live in neighborhoods with access to the same-day delivery as the white residents were. If you look at New York, the data shows the same disturbing, significant differences in the different neighborhoods or countries in New York as well. When we say bias, the title of our talk today, right? When we say bias, I really like this definition from Alan Turing Institute of what the bias is in the data and what AI can do. And like I said, because the AI models and the systems gain their insights from existing structures and dynamics of the societies, it's about it's about our understanding of humanity. The data is about human. So it has the potential, or it has the potential to reproduce, reinforce, and amplify the patterns of marginalization, inequality, and discrimination that already exist in the societies. So you're deepening these injustices and marginalization even further if you're dependent on data, or if you're building your systems, your products on data that is already biased. You're also replicating, if you're not sorry about that. If you're not taking intentional steps on the developer team or the developer's own preconceptions and unconscious biases, you're also potentially replicating the team's biases in the systems. And the data and looking at the causal relationships or correlations. If the data is not representative of the populations where you're drawing inferences, you might be drawing the wrong inferences. And I'm not even going to go to it. I feel like I'm talking more to a technical crowd. I'm not even going to go through the debate on correlation versus causation and why that's important. But we mentioned the bias in the data set. We mentioned the unconscious or conscious biases in the developers. I just put on this slide and the next some of the 150 plus cognitive biases. We're not when we talk about unconscious bias, we're not talking about something, one or two things. We really need to step back and understand what we might unintentionally be bringing to the table, and also embedding in the systems. So far, a lot of the stuff that you might have heard before, as well as understanding that your output is only as good as your input. What good data management looks like is creating checks and balances to mitigate these AI biases. You can be you need to focus on ensuring the existing data sets do not create and reinforce existing biases. You can do this through identifying them in the data sets, through the use of AI tools, using specific checks or specific statistical and measurements. You can pre-process and correct existing biases in your data set before actually developing the algorithm. You can conduct pre-release trials and post-release monitoring to identify, regulate, and mitigate these biases. These are all good practices. However, please understand that you can never get rid of bias. This is really about doing everything you can to mitigate and minimize, and then being transparent about your decisions and the trade-offs that you made. You might go through all these steps and say, hey, this is what we've done. This is how we mitigated it. We're conscious of this. We're monitoring, and we thought, say, this metric was more important for us. Say, accuracy was more important for us than this one. Privacy was more important for us than this one. So we made these changes in the system or in the data set, and just being transparent about that, so the implementers understand it. So you're not then moving on those biases, both the data as well as the unconscious biases, from the developer team to implementers to the end user. We talked about the data sets. A lot of the times when unless you're a big tech company who have a lot of resources, time, and money to put into creating data sets, what we usually end up doing is finding available data sets, already existing data sets, and trying to mold that into our problem, the problem that we're trying to solve, or the model that we're trying to build. A lot of the times the data might not actually might not have been collected the way that we are asking the questions in our problem. It might not actually overlap with our solution, but it's the best thing that you're going to get your hands onto. So a lot of the times the companies, the researchers end up using it. However, even when we're looking at big data sets that are publicly available, that are or publicly or commercially available, there are still issues in that. Just because you have based your research or your product on ImageNet or some university's data set doesn't mean that it's ethically collected, that it doesn't have any biases in it, that it doesn't have any issues in the labeling, etc. So one of the examples of this is ImageNet. ImageNet, as you might know, is one of the biggest data sets when it comes to labeled images. It has about 14 million images that were trained, and deep neural networks use these image classifications to train their models. when you're looking at the figure here, you'll see that 45% of the ImageNet data is from the United States, whereas United States only represents 4% of the world population. Switch that around, China and India together represent 36% of the world's population. However, only 3% of the data comes from these two countries in the data set. Some of the countries are not even represented here. So you can see how the data might be skewed in terms of the representation, in terms of the labeling, in terms of what is missing in there. Similar concerning patterns in health data, in genetic studies especially. And this is really crucial. This is what you're looking at when we say high-stake decisions, high-stake algorithms, that if you're basing your model, your algorithm, your predictions, your diagnostics, whatever that you're using the data for, you might actually have fatal consequences on somebody. In a number of diseases, in a number of illnesses, different people from different ethnic backgrounds experience and show symptoms differently from one another. So it's crucial that we have a full representation of the genetic data to be able to provide correct diagnostics, correct medication, correct solutions to people. Similarly here, although there is some improvements between 2009 to 2016, I actually don't have a more I haven't seen any more recent data on this split. Although there's some sort of improvement in the representation, you'll see that there's almost no representation when it comes to Africans, Hispanics, islanders, or indigenous people. And then we also have the issue of data sets that have been determined to be biased, that have been retracted, removed, deleted, that are still being used in products, in research studies, etc. Microsoft, Duke, and Stanford deleted their databases, especially on the facial recognition side, facial recognition data sets earlier last year. This year, MIT took down a massive data set due to the racist and offensive content. However, that issue of derived data sets, so someone making a derived data set out of these retracted data sets at some point, those are still around, and there's still a huge amount of research on products that are being used on this stuff. So it's crucial to tie everything together, is that we understand the context of the problem. We understand the context of how the data was collected, understanding our data set in terms of the representation and potential biases, and understanding as developers, as implementers, our own biases. Taking down a data set is often not an adequate method of preventing further use of the data sets. Some of the suggestions, I don't know if you follow Arvind Narayanan on Twitter, he's pretty vocal about the issues around this. One of the some of the suggestions that he provided was researchers not use this data sets, and journals asserting that they will not accept using these data sets, and also providing some sort of regulation about the creation of derived data sets that might eventually enable unethical research. And then we come to the diversity piece around who's this developer team that are building these products as well, right? So we're looking at representation in our data set, representation in our developer teams. I use this slide a lot because it really provides a snapshot of the issue in Silicon Valley and beyond. What you're looking here is the employee representation and the 20 plus top tech firms in that dominate the market. There's this good representation of whites and Asians. However, when they were trying to figure out how to represent the other groups in this graph, they actually had to combine Blacks, Latinx, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and mixed races into one group and put it under underrepresented minorities. At the end, at the bottom level at eBay, at the point of this research, the representation was of that underrepresented group was 4%. At best, in Lyft, it gets up to 14%. So just to give you an idea of who's developing these systems and what their assumptions might be, and actually how representative are they of the end users or the communities who might be impacted by these systems. Lack of diversity in the team can cause lack of diversity in perspectives and experiences, understanding of the opinions, backgrounds, and this is not only the last point is about. This is not only about the developer team, but you also want some similar checks and balances and controls and diversity in your rater pool who are putting labels. If you're putting the labels yourself, like how diverse is that team and what the consequences of the labels are on the model. So yes, AI bias in AI is complex. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at we shouldn't be trying to improve that. But what we're looking at is one, lack of social context. Not understanding the social problems, not understanding where the data came from, what the problem actually is. Like I said in the very first slide, the context, historical, social, and racial context behind it. The second is around imperfect processes. So that might be anything about how you acquire your data, how you process that, how you use that, how you monitor the robustness, reliability, accuracy, etc. The other one is around defining the fairness method or metric that you're going to use. At this point, when you're looking at different academic research, there are more than 20 different ways of mathematically building fairness or defining fairness. And some of them are not compatible with each other, so you might not be hitting multiple definitions of fairness with a single model. So you do have to make some trade-offs, and being transparent about that trade-off, being confident and having that debate and making sure that what you decided doesn't have a huge impact on the end users is crucial. Like I said, another reason why bias is so complex in the AI systems is because AI doesn't have any sense of morality or values itself. It's dependent on its creators. It's not gonna, unless you're the ones that are putting the constraints around it. You're the ones providing what the outcomes should look like or success metrics should look like. So AI is not going to go and say, hey, hold, I think there's an issue here, unless you're using specific AI, statistical models to actually look for bias. And even then, it only looks at what it's defined or built to look at. It's not going to have its own sense of morality or values and stop you from creating bias in your model. And then you have the unknowns of unknowns, right? You don't know what you don't know. Even with the best of intentions and mitigation and pre-processing, post-monitoring, etc., you might not know the real impact or possible impact until you release the model or you release your product out in the wild, um, which ideally the way to work around that is having really good monitoring mechanisms and having really good feedback mechanisms that as soon as you see something, an impact, being able to collect that feedback and being able to quickly either kill the model, pause the model, or improve your product. And then the last bit is around sorry, the last bit on this piece is, everything I talked right so far is about unconscious bias, not knowing what might be involved in your data or in your process, etc. So unintended stuff. However, there will always be, because information is power, because knowledge is power, and AI and these products, especially when we're talking about models that impact humans, it really is about power synergies. So there will always be people who will not do anything, or who will kind of push these products, or who will not do anything to remove biases, because they might be oblivious to the experiences of others. They might be invested in the status quo because it serves them, or they might have been implicitly or explicitly trained to preserve that position. We say very regularly that ethics and critical thinking and understanding these consequences and the implications of AI products is very crucial for computer science students, engineering students, and vice versa for the social sciences as well. It's becoming a very merged area. So you not only need a diversity of opinions, but diversity also helps you if you've been implicitly trained around this stuff to break those biases as well. So what I want to do in the next couple of slides is, one, to kind of have a really high level overview of what might be the impact of AI when you don't consider the consequences, or when you're trying to put technological solutions for social problems in the context of criminal justice system on this slide. And the next one will be, what does workplace surveillance looks like. So you might have read, and throughout this slide, the red ones, I'm going to bring up some more, but the red ones really are the ones where AI systems already exist and trying to do predictions or classifications. So just keep that in mind. You might have heard about predictive policing systems. These might be, there are two different types of predictive policing. One actually tries to predict the location of where a crime is going to occur, looking at the past data, which neighborhood, which area. And the other one is who is going to predict the crime. So it's on a more personal level. So it looks at the person's background and data sets, etc., and tries to come up with a prediction. But either way, there are a lot of police departments, at least in the US, as well as around the world, that are in Europe and in Southeast Asia, that are experimenting, or that are actually using these predictive policing systems. And the business case that they underline, which is not true, and it's a false dichotomy, is that system allows them to send resources, allocate resources to the neighborhoods that preemptively and in a proactive way. But what happens is, when you're using these systems, you're actually increasing the surveillance in those neighborhoods. So you got to remember that these data sets, a lot of the times, the data sets are based on criminal records that are results of racial discrimination, biased policing, policing actions in different neighborhoods, or over surveillance in certain neighborhoods that then led to over arrest records, etc. So you already have this data set that is very biased. It is proven to be biased where the systems are being built. And sometimes it's not even your own locations data that is being built. There's a lot of predictive policing systems where, say, I'm in Michigan, the data set or the model is built on Michigan's data set in terms of the model, and then it is put to use on, say, Louisiana or Dallas. So it gets the, how do you say, the location data, but the model is not reflective of the location. But let me not digress from this slide. What happens is you get this predictive policing systems, the police station or the police sends additional resources to the area, increase surveillance. You use facial recognition systems to, it might be live streams where you're checking faces on the street against data sets, criminal data sets. Somehow, the increase, you might not get matches with your data set, but almost in every single case, the increased surveillance in a neighborhood ends up with increased arrests or stop and frisk practices, because at one hand, you need to justify why you've sent your resources in that area, and you need to provide results. You might not find what you're looking for, but there are a lot of metrics in policing system in terms of performance management systems that will require you to create arrests or stops or whatever to make sure that you're not spending resources. You're not spending or wasting resources rather. So you go, you increase the surveillance, you stop someone or arrest someone for something. Then you have the predictive detention and release decisions already in use and already proven to be biased. You add to whoever you arrested or stopped, there are bail and processing charges, fees that the arrested person needs to pay on top of the tickets or on top of the costs. The person might not be, you're already potentially looking at disadvantaged backgrounds, so the person might not have the means to pay the bail or a lawyer, so ends up pleading guilty. And you cannot imagine, I strongly suggest that if you haven't and if you're interested, look at some of the data and some of the books that are focused on this. The number of people who are perfectly innocent but having to plead guilty because they cannot afford bail. Then there's another algorithm that helps the officers or helps the courts to decide on sentencing, the sentencing length. And at this point, you might be incarcerated. What happens is, even if you're not incarcerated, even if you're not put in prison, even if you deemed to be, you're released and you're found to be perfectly innocent, you will always have that arrest record in your records. It stays there. You might just have had a bad luck, and through the systems, through the biased models, through the biased practices, and imperfect processes and practices and wrong incentive methods, you end up being arrested, you're released, or you're put into jail. Even if you're released, you're going to have that record. So there are predictive recidivism decisions. You might have heard Compass, and I'm not going to go into much detail because I'm more focused on the outcomes here. What that means is having an arrest record in your hand means that you're either going to get minimal or no employment opportunity. At that point, if you need any benefits, if you need any like welfare support, because you have an arrest record, you're no longer eligible to receive benefits on housing, food, school. So not only you, but your family is also suffering at this point. You're voting in a lot of the states, at least in the US. You don't have any voting rights anymore. In a lot of the states in the US, if you have a record, your family member who's offering you, say you have a nephew, niece, uncle, aunt, whoever's brother, someone offering you to stay in a room in their residence, they potentially lose their housing benefit as well. There are certain states that will prevent that. And also, if somehow you wanna, get some loans or insurance, whether it's health insurance, whether loans on a car, so you can actually go to a job or get some housing because you cannot get any benefit, etc. This also impact the loan or insurance decisions algorithms as well. And on top of that, in a number of states, you use your driver's license as well. So just looking at this, underlining the importance of data, underlining the importance of what bias in the system means, how this all come together, whether they should be there in the first place, whether we should be using predictive policing. My answer is no, but that's my personal view. In the first place, fast forward, this is what happens to an individual's life and what they're gonna experience for the rest of their lives. Not only themselves, but their families. Not only themselves, but their communities, their neighborhoods. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about replicating and deepening the structural injustices. Another point, I'm pretty mindful of time. I want to leave some time for question and answer, is employee surveillance. How the products that were initially data mining techniques or surveillance techniques that were initially created to understand the consumer profiles, understand the consumer, are now being turned around, and the spotlight is, especially with pandemic, with work from home arrangements, remote working arrangements, how this is now shifting to employee surveillance and the questions around who owns the employee data, who's liable for decisions made on this, what happens, how can you know that you've been discriminated against because of these algorithms and employee surveillance, and how can you fight against that? It not only erodes the sense of autonomy and discretion in the workplace, but it also creates competition over cooperation between the employees. There are already news coming out from big tech companies on how they use it to avoid union work or employees from unionizing or trying to have collective action. But it's not only about that, it's also about your medical data, your fitness data, how you're using the equipment that the organization or the company has provided to you, and what are they doing with that data, and saying, are they sharing it with the insurance company? A lot of the companies that collect this data do share it with the insurance companies. What does that mean for your future insurance eligibility, your future insurance benefits or premiums, etc.? So things to think about, and before you go into any of these projects, contribute to these projects, or you might be even at the end user side being impacted by these models or products. Understanding the consequences, understanding the impact, and advocating for change is crucial. And my last slide is, before we start taking questions, is a couple organizations that I contribute to, collaborate with. If you're interested, we would love for you to join. One is Women in AI Ethics. This is about highlighting the voice of women and LGBT folks or LGBT peers who are embedding AI ethics in their work, in their professional work, in their advocacy work, activism work, where we can highlight their work and bring it to the forefront and make sure that we're hearing from the voices that are not heard in mainstream conferences, mainstream news. The other one is For Humanity. This is a nonprofit. We are trying to build independent audit of AI systems across different industries, across different areas. We have different task force, not only that, but we have different task force that focus on UK's ICO GDPR certification, New York City bias bill that requires audit, that is going to require audit if it passes on automated employment decision tools. We're working on COVID-19 contract tracing app audits, and audits in general for those companies that are subject to Sarbanes-Oxley. So if you're interested in understanding audit of AI systems, if you want to contribute, please join us or consider one of these two organizations.
Thank you, Merve. Thank you for sharing your research and your thoughts on the bias in AI system. It was very enlightening. So let's, if I want to summarize your discussion, basically what we need to know is that bias exists in our data. There is no question about it. This data is representing human decision making that they are consciously or unconsciously are biased towards. They have more than hundreds of probably biases in their decision making. So what is it really important is that we need to understand these type of biases and make sure that how these biases affects our system and what are the implications on the machine decision making. So I'm going to start going through the questions. I'm going to start with a few of your latest slides when you talked about the predictive policing, especially the second one that you mentioned. If somebody is wrongly arrested for a crime that has not been done, and the decision was made wrongly by an AI-powered system, what do you think we can do to make an AI system accountable for a wrong decision it has made, which has long-term human life impact? What are some of the things that maybe practitioners or AI ethicists can do to help make these systems accountable towards the decision they make?
I want to kind of rephrase that question a bit. Not making the system accountable, not projecting human features, human responsibilities on a system. At the end of the day, AI is what we created, and the ultimate responsibility, accountability, liability, intellectual property rights, everything sits with the human. So the agency, the moral agency, is with the human, with its creators, and not the system. So what can the humans who have developed and deployed the systems can do? Again, for predictive policing, because my personal opinion that we shouldn't be using predictive systems to figure out, okay, is Somaieh or is Merve going to, commit a crime today or in this neighborhood? We need to trust human agency. We need to trust the humans' ability to change, the community to protect themselves. There's a number of factors that build into this. So I don't think we should have predictive policing systems in the first place. Mm-hmm. But if you have a system that, okay, we decided we're going to build, we're going to deploy, making sure that you have open channels of feedback, communication, and constant monitoring of your model, what they decided as the metrics, success metrics, in terms of accuracy of the system, recency of your data set that you're working on, the robustness of the data sets, the reliability, the reproducibility, resiliency of the model. So having those metrics in the first place, and then constantly monitoring that, and then constantly having a feedback channel open to the end users as well as the people implementing. Because, like I said, even with the best of intentions as the developers, you cannot possibly have all the use cases, all the edge cases thought out ahead of time. So understanding where the implementers, say the police officer in this case, had issues, where they see issues. If you have wrong arrest, Detroit, Michigan has the terrible distinction of having the first wrongfully case of someone arrested wrongfully because of facial recognition system. It's understanding what the impact of that, why that happened, and what should be, should you even keep using the system? Should you kill the system? Should you pause the system? How do you improve that? Having that constant feedback and monitoring is very crucial.
Thank you. The next question is about AI systems for recruitment. Although there's been a lot of in the research, for example, there are lots of startups working on AI-powered system for recruitment, and they talk about all the benefits of using AI-powered system for HR services. But there are extremely big challenges to be in implementing a fair AI-powered system. So in one of your slides, you mentioned about the representation of minorities in the data. Actually, at first, I'm going to go to that question, then go back to that HR as well. So there's a question coming from our audience that you talked about the representation of various ethnicity in your data. What are your thoughts about representation of social classes in the data? Is that something that we should consider?
Obviously, that's a context dependent question, right? So what kind of solution that you're looking at and what kind of data you're collecting, whether that should be social or socioeconomic information should be included in the first place, is very context related to the issue. For example, NHSX, if you're in the UK, you're familiar with the COVID tracking app, contract tracing app rather, that has been pushed out by NHSX, which interestingly enough has been helped or has been developed partially by Palantir. Not only collects health data, COVID-related data, but it's also asking people to provide their, mental abilities, and any mental health conditions, their socioeconomic backgrounds, which if you're strictly looking at understanding contract tracing and trying to help the situation, improve the situation, contain the contain the expansion. Those are really unrelated questions, asking why are we even collecting this stuff. So what you're collecting should be really focused on the questions that you're asking, the relevant stuff, and should be protective of privacy. So going with the minimums of this is the minimum that or this is what I need, and not the whole wild world. Just because I can collect this data, should you be collecting it? Just focusing on that and being really clear about what your intentions are.
And regarding this AI system for recruitment, so let's say if the data sets that we are using for developing a machine learning model, let's say if there are a few variables in that data sets that they are biased, and we are aware of it, and this is the only data available to develop a machine learning model, how do you think we should mitigate this bias? Should we mitigate this bias at the data level, or should we address it at the development of the system while developing the system?
So the recruitment piece is close to my heart, right? So having had more than a decade of HR recruitment and HR tech background, this is something that I'm pretty vocal about. The issue with the recruitment systems is touches actually on a few things. One is representation of data and how your model is representing that, which kind of answers is the point that you're making. If your data is not representative of certain populations, your model's accuracy or predictiveness is not going to be representative of those populations either. So you're going to have this really skewed or biased result for, say, you didn't have enough people with Asian people in your data set, then the accuracy for those people might be very skewed. Say if you're using facial recognition or facial analysis software in your recruitment, or if you're using things like affective analysis, like sentiment analysis, or voice recognition and NLP to analyze your answers, etc. The system might not understand your answers, your verbal answers. It might not understand the nuances, the tones, etc. But that's really about again, that representation. Another thing in the recruitment that I want to touch, because it's not only about the data and the data set they're using that might have issues, but the actual AI function or AI product, whatever you want to call it, that you're using facial analysis, looking at my face or looking at your face, Somaieh, saying, okay, the distance between the eyes to the mouth is this much. This, like, she blinks too much, or she has brown eyes, or whatever, smiles too much, doesn't smile too much. Having this kind of analysis and having those being a factor. So for facial analysis, or sentiment analysis. What's your sentiments? Like, do you sound stressed? Do you sound excited, etc.? Can you actually game the system? And on the natural language processing side, on the voice analysis side, say you might have a disability that impacts your speech. You might have a speech impediment. You might not have a native. You might not be interviewing in your native language. You might not use like very big words or complicated, sophisticated words, but none of these at the end of the day would have an impact on, in majority of the cases, would have an impact on how you're actually doing your job. They're not predictive, what your facial physical features, what's the pitch of your sound, what's the pitch of your voice, the complexity of your answers, etc., do not have a predictive value or validity in predicting success in that job. So I'm really conscious about not only the bias in the data set, but the actual tools that you're using. Why are we using these? Should we even be using this for recruitment? Because the main thing here is, it's not only one job that you're losing, that you might be filtered out, but as these tools are becoming more prevalent, more ubiquitous, adopted by more and more companies, you might be locked out permanently for certain jobs from certain companies, or for certain categories of employment completely. So whether you're applying for my company, or I don't know, Hilton, or whatever, Unilever, Bank of America, you name it, any company. I'm not like naming names here to shame it, just like stuff that comes to my mind. As more and more companies adopt these tools, we're going to run into, if you don't manage this correctly and have the checks and balances, we're going to have the issue of permanently locking people, huge parts of population, out of jobs.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, that we have to be very, very careful using this AI system in a context that the decision has human right impact, because a decision that you don't get a job is going to have a lot of consequences in your life as a person. So it's, you don't recommend these systems for the cases like this. There's another
Well,
question.
so one caveat, Somaieh, it's one of my missions to, work with my HR peers as well as the CEOs and C-level to have them understand the consequences. But I'm not saying every single product is bad. It's not a fight to go back to
Yes.
paper and pencil, or like very heavily human biased decisions. We need to understand what the product is, what it can do. Have the HR people go through due diligence and have the actual capability
To do it.
to do the due diligence and mitigate the risk, right?
Understood. Yeah. There's another question again about the data. So the question comes from the audience that if our data are historically biased because of some of the biases that and inequalities that exist in our society, what is it that we can do to perhaps maybe correct this or improve it?
Push for change, advocate for change, and advocate for regulation. Because what happens is your data is not coming from one source. It's coming from thousands on a daily basis, from the moment that you wake up until you go bed. And if you're wearing Fitbit or whatever, even when you're sleeping, data is being collected about you. So understanding one, where you're providing data, you cannot always control it. But advocating for change and advocating for regulation is crucial, because companies collect data for themselves. They also sell that information. They also sell that information to data brokers. Data brokers sell that information to third parties. So you cannot possibly have like one single line of, okay, this data about me is not correct. Let me try to correct that. There is no way that as an individual you can fight this.
Right.
The only way is having regulations and legislations and forcing companies to be responsible about this. For example, GDPR in Europe provides access to your data, access to rectification, access for right to have your data erased. We don't have that in US. A lot of the countries around the world do not have that, and even in Europe there are issues with the implementation of that. But we need to constantly push for that regulation, because this is not an individual battle anymore.
Thank you. Actually, ended up in a point that I actually wanted to talk about. That's actually AI governance, what you mentioned. So these are very good efforts that have been done in Europe regarding GDPR. So at the global level, I mean, there have been international cooperations, some good examples such as the Asilomar or the other, the ethically aligned design of IEEE. So yeah, there are some good examples of it. But what do you think is more needed to make sure these regulations are, or these guidelines, not regulations, are implemented in a broader kind of content and is used by multiple industries? What do you think we can do, or what could be the next step?
I would say, depending on where you work, where you advocate, it's like being vocal about this, trying to contribute, volunteer into this work, but also really on a local level, in your company, in your neighborhood, in your constituency, wherever your jurisdiction is, pushing for that change. Be vocal about it and be part of it. Not only say we need change, but kind of contribute to that change. That's what I was sharing the last slide about, join Women in AI Ethics, join For Humanity. If you have more interest, join IEEE work groups. There are a number of work groups. Or, start smaller, join some smaller meetups or project groups. The one silver lining about the COVID thing is a lot of this work has gone online, and I think, as well as the conferences, and I think a lot of the stuff is going to remain online. So wherever you are in the world, you can contribute and you can make your voice heard. So depending on your industry, whatever you're passionate for, just searching for that and contributing.
No. Thank you very much. I know we are conscious of time and we want to make sure that you get to your other workshop and presentation. So I just want to say thank you again. That was really enlightening, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. So, and for our audience, please make sure that you sign up for our website and follow the AI ethics stream, and you get a notification for the future events. So have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.